Ever heard of a guy who lived a dozen lives before he turned 21? A guy who flew planes without ever stepping into flight school, ran a hospital without knowing a thing about medicine, and even passed the bar exam without going to law school? Sounds like a movie, right? Well, it was. But before Hollywood got its hands on it, it was the real-life story of Frank. Born in New York in 1948, Frank was just your average kid. His life took a turn when his parents' marriage crumbled, and at just 16, he was out in the world, figuring things out the only way he knew how, by outsmarting it. His first con? A gas card scam. His father gave him a credit card to buy car parts, but Frank saw an opportunity. He struck a deal with gas station attendants, buy expensive auto parts, return them for cash, split the money, and pocket his share. Simple. Effective. But while this added to his father's financial troubles, it wasn't what ruined him. His father was already struggling with IRS issues and business failures. Now picture this. It's the late 60s. Air travel is booming. Pilots? They're practically rock stars. And a 16-year-old kid looking sharp in a crisp Pan Am uniform walks through the terminal like he owns the place. People nod, smile. No one questions him. Why would they? He's got the confidence, the look, he's got the ID. But here's the kicker. Frank wasn't a pilot. Never even took a flying lesson. But he knew how people operated and how systems worked. A little forgery, some charm, and a whole lot of nerve. He deadheaded his way around the country, hitching free rides on planes, staying in luxury hotels, and cashing fake paychecks to fund the whole thing. He exploited Pan Am's system. If pretending to be a pilot wasn't wild enough, how about this? Frank's next act. Dr. Frank Connors, working at a hospital in Georgia. That's right, he wasn't just walking around in a white coat. He was actually in a hospital setting, interacting with patients and medical staff. But let's be clear, he wasn't running a hospital or making life or death decisions. He carefully avoided situations where he'd have to perform medical procedures, relying on other doctors and interns to handle the real work. Lucky for him, no one caught on, until he moved on to his next scheme. The lawyer gig. I mean, why stop at doctor and pilot when you can be a lawyer too, right? Frank claimed to have passed the Louisiana bar exam after forging a Harvard law degree. However, there's no verified evidence he actually took or passed the exam. More likely, he used forged documents and smooth-talking skills to land a legal assistant job. What is certain is that he worked for about 8 months before a real Harvard graduate started asking too many questions. When the truth was close to being exposed, Frank didn't wait around. He resigned and vanished before things escalated. Of course, Frank's biggest cons weren't just impersonations. They were his financial scams. He didn't just forge checks. He outsmarted banks with clever tricks, altering routing numbers to delay fraud detection, using magnetic ink tricks to bypass check processing machines, even putting fake, out-of-service signs on bank deposit drop boxes, then standing outside dressed as a guard collecting real customers' deposits. Simple, brilliant, devastatingly effective. At some point, you gotta wonder, was it skill, luck, or just sheer audacity? Either way, it worked until it didn't, because while Frank was hopping from identity to identity, one man was always right behind him. Agent Shea, the FBI's top guy on fraud cases. This was his white whale. Frank had slipped through the cracks too many times, and Shea wasn't about to let him disappear again. But Frank played his final card. Europe. He fled to France, thinking he could outrun the law. Not knowing fate had other plans. In 1969, French police arrested him. Some say an ex-girlfriend turned him in, but there's no solid proof. What is certain is that he was locked up in Perpignan prison, a dark, rat-infested hellhole where he spent months in solitary confinement, barely surviving. From there, he was extradited to Sweden. But even then, Swedish authorities initially refused to send him directly to the US, citing concerns about harsh prison conditions. He was held there before finally being deported. Back in the States, he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. But here's the plot twist. The FBI saw something in him. They knew that if a teenager could outsmart the biggest banks, he could probably help stop guys like him from doing it again. After serving nearly 5 years, he was placed in a work release program, assisting the FBI in fraud investigations. His freedom wasn't immediate. His cooperation was a condition of his parole, and that's exactly what he did. He spent years helping law enforcement crack fraud cases, even designing new security measures to prevent the kind of scams he once pulled off. But let's be clear, he wasn't simply handed a job by the FBI. He had to prove himself. His expertise strengthened fraud prevention measures. Today, he's a respected consultant, a security expert, even a best-selling author. The ultimate irony? The man who once made a living faking identities now helps people protect theirs. Of course, not everyone buys every detail of his story. Some say he exaggerated his exploits, that his time as a lawyer might not have been as significant as he claimed. Maybe he did embellish. But one thing's for sure, he pulled off some of the boldest frauds in history and lived to tell the tale.